41 years I kept that workshop locked after my son said it smelled like motor oil and old man. The key was still on my keychain the morning I came home from my brother's place in Tucson to find my late wife's bread box sitting on the curb next to a black trash bag. I sat in my truck for a full minute before I got out. The bread box was maple. I'd made it in 1987, the year after Carol and I got married, out of scraps left over from building the back deck. She'd painted little wheat sheaves along the sides with a fine brush, hunched over the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with her reading glasses sliding down her nose. I used to tease her about those glasses. She never did get them adjusted right. I picked it up off the curb. The lid hinge was bent. Someone had forced it open wrong. I carried it inside. The house felt different the moment I stepped through the door. I don't know how else to describe it. Not dirty, not loud. Just different in the way a room feels different when someone has been going through your things. A particular kind of wrongness in the air, like a scent you can't name. My son Devon and his wife Amber have been living with me for 14 months. Let me back up. Carol died in the spring of 2021, pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks, which the doctor said was fast even for that particular cruelty. We'd had 38 years together. We'd raised Devon in this house, in this neighborhood, on this street where I still know every crack in the sidewalk. After she was gone, I did what men my age do when they don't know what else to do. I worked. I fixed things. I reorganized the garage 3 times in 6 months. I went to church because Carol would have wanted me to, even though I mostly sat in the back row and stared at the stained glass without hearing a word. Devon called me that following January. He was in a bind, he said. He and Amber had been renting a place up in Columbus, but the landlord was selling the building and they had 60 days. His job at the logistics company had been cut to part-time before the holidays. Amber wasn't working. She left her position at the dental office back in September. Some disagreement with the office manager she never fully explained to me. They had a baby, my granddaughter Rosie, who was 8 months old, and the most perfect thing I'd seen since Devon himself was born. What kind of father says no to that? I told them to come. I told them they could have the upstairs, the guest room and the office, which I converted into Rosie's nursery. I told them to save their money, get back on their feet, take as long as they needed. I said that word. Needed. I should have said reasonable. I should have put a number on it. 6 months, maybe. 8 at the outside. But I didn't, because I was 64 years old and lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to myself yet. And because Rosie smelled like baby powder and grabbed my thumb with her whole fist and looked at me like I was the most important person in the world. They moved in on a Tuesday in late February. By April, Amber had redecorated the guest bathroom without asking me. By June, Devon had taken over the living room television most evenings. By August, I'd started eating dinner in the kitchen rather than the dining room, because it felt like their space now, not mine. I told myself this was fine. I told myself this is what family does. The thing about Carol's workshop, my workshop technically, but we always called it hers, is that it sat off the back of the garage, a room she'd claimed when Devon was in middle school and I'd walled off for her as a birthday present. She made things in there, quilts mostly, but also wreaths, framed cross-stitches, the kind of intricate handmade objects that take patience I never had. When she was in her workshop on a Saturday morning, she'd have the old clock radio tuned to the oldie station, and a cup of tea going cold on the workbench, and she was the most content person I'd ever known. After she died, I couldn't go in there. I locked the door and I kept the key and I left it alone for 3 years. Amber asked me about it in September. She'd been exploring the garage looking for a place to store Rosie's outgrown baby equipment, she said, and noticed the locked door. "What's in there?" she asked. "Carol's things," I said. "Her quilting supplies, her projects. I haven't touched it." She nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they're filing information away. I didn't think much of it at the time. The call from my brother came in early November. His wife Pauline had a knee replacement scheduled, and she was nervous about the recovery. Would I come stay a few weeks, help around the house, keep her company? Carol and Pauline had been close. It felt like the right thing to do. I told Devon and Amber I'd be gone 3 weeks, maybe a month. I wrote down the neighbor's number, Mrs. Kowalski next door, in case of anything with the house. I reminded Amber where the circuit breaker was, where the water shut-off was. I told Devon to put the trash out on Thursdays. I drove the 8 hours to Tucson. Pauline's recovery went well. My brother and I watched football. I slept better than I had in months. I was 4 weeks and 2 days gone before a feeling came over me. I can't entirely explain. Just a restlessness. A pull back toward home. I called Devon on a Thursday night and got his voicemail. I called again Friday morning. Amber answered and said everything was fine. No problems. Rosie had a little cold, but nothing serious. She sounded perfectly normal. I left Saturday morning. I pulled into my own driveway at 4:15 in the afternoon, and that's when I saw the bread box on the curb. Inside, I set the bread box on the kitchen table and stood there breathing for a moment. Then I walked back through the house. The living room was theirs. Toys on the floor, Amber's cardigan over the back of Carol's armchair. The dining room was unchanged. The kitchen had that particular smell of someone else's cooking habits. Then I went to the garage. The workshop door was open. Not just unlocked, open, wide open, and empty. I stood in the doorway for what felt like a very long time. The workbench was clear. The shelves were bare. The wicker basket Carol kept her thread in was gone. The quilt frame she'd saved up 3 months to buy was gone. The half-finished double wedding ring quilt she'd been working on the fall before she got sick. Gone. I turned around slowly and walked back into the house. Amber was in the kitchen starting dinner. Rosie was in her high chair. The sight of my granddaughter is the only reason I kept my voice level. "Where are Carol's things?" I asked. Amber turned from the stove. She read my face for a moment, and then she did something I was not prepared for. She shrugged. "We needed the space," she said. "Devon and I talked about it. The room was just sitting there. We're going to set up a little play area for Rosie, maybe storage. I didn't think you'd mind. You hadn't been in there in years." "Where are her things?" I asked again. "We donated most of it. The Goodwill on Route 9. The quilt frame was too bulky, so we put that out with the recycling last week. The small stuff it was a lot of old material, honestly. Some of it was probably moldy." I heard the words. I processed them. I thought about Carol hunched over that quilt for 3 months in the evenings, stitching in those tiny, careful rings. "You threw away her unfinished quilt," I said. "It was just fabric," Amber said. "She's been gone 3 years, at some point." "Don't," I said. My voice came out very quiet. I have never in my life raised a hand to anyone, and I was not going to lose my composure in front of my granddaughter. But I looked at my daughter-in-law standing in my kitchen in my house with Carol's apron. Carol's apron, the blue one with the sunflowers, hanging on the hook by the refrigerator. And I felt something shift in me. Something that had been patient too long. I went to my bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. Devon came home at 6:30. I heard him in the kitchen with Amber, their voices low. I heard a pause, then footsteps toward the bedroom. He knocked. "Dad." "Come in." He sat in the chair by the window, the one that used to be in the living room before his family rearranged the furniture. He looked like what he was, a 34-year-old man who had just been told something bad he'd rather not deal with. "Amber said you were upset," he started. "She threw away your mother's things," I said. "She donated them to Goodwill, so someone will." "The quilts, Devon. The double wedding ring quilt. Your mother worked on that quilt for 4 months. She was going to give it to you when you got married. She told me that. She never finished it because she got sick." He was quiet. "Did you know about this?" I asked. "She mentioned maybe clearing out the workshop. I said I'd talk to you about it, but then I forgot. Work's been busy and Rosie's been." "You forgot," I said. Dad, I want to ask you something," I said, "and I want you to answer me honestly. What have you done with the money you've saved over the last 14 months? He blinked. I pressed on. "You've been living here rent-free, no utilities. I buy groceries most weeks. What are you paying? Your car insurance, your phones. I'm not a man who tracks other people's spending, Devon, but I'm asking you now. Do you have money saved?" He looked at the floor. "It's been complicated. Amber's been taking some online classes. Do you have money saved?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Some." "Enough to rent an apartment?" "Probably, if we were careful." I nodded. "All right," I said. "I want you to start looking. I'll give you 30 days. That's more than enough time to find a place in this market. He stared at me. You're kicking us out. I'm asking you to do what you should have done 10 months ago, I said. I'm asking you to take your family and stand on your own 2 feet. I want to help Rosie. I will always help Rosie. But I can't have people living in this house who treat it like a storage unit, and my wife's memory like clutter. You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life. He left the room without another word. I sat there in the dark and listened to the muffled sounds of a tense conversation through the wall, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Clear. Just perfectly. Simply clear. The next morning, Amber came to find me at the kitchen table with my coffee. She sat down across from me without being invited, which is something I'd noticed she did. She had the look of a person who had spent the night preparing a speech. I think you're being unreasonable, she said. We have a baby. Do you understand how hard it is to just? I understand completely, I said. I raised one. The workshop was sitting empty. It was wasted space. I was trying to make this house work for all of us. This is not your house, I said. It was the first time I had said that out loud in 14 months. It felt like setting down a very heavy box. I have never once treated you like a guest. I gave you full use of every room. I asked for nothing. Not rent, not contribution, not courtesy. All I asked was that the workshop be left alone. And I didn't even ask that. I assumed it, because I assumed you could see the door was locked and understand that some things are private. I was wrong to assume. Her stuff was just sitting there. Her stuff, I said, was all I have left of her. Amber was quiet. The bread box, I said. Do you know why that was in the garage? Because I built it for her the year after we got married. She used it every single day for 20 years. I put it in the garage after she died because I couldn't look at it. But I wasn't ready to let it go. You put it on the curb. Something moved across her face. Not quite guilt, something adjacent to it. I didn't know that, she said quietly. You didn't ask, I said. She left the table. I finished my coffee. That afternoon I drove to the Goodwill on Route 9 with a clear description of what had been donated. The woman at the intake desk was kind and patient. She pulled up their records and walked me back through the processing area. Some of Carol's thread and notions were still on a sorting table, not yet shelved. A bag of fabric squares, a particular red and cream calico Carol had loved, was in a bin near the back. The quilt frame was gone. Someone had bought it 3 days prior. The unfinished quilt itself was not in their records. I believe Amber had told the truth about one thing. It had likely been thrown in the trash with the scraps, not donated at all. I stood in that Goodwill back room and held a single bag of Carol's fabric squares and breathed through my nose until I was steady again. The woman at the desk asked if I was all right. I will be, I said. I brought the fabric home and put it in my closet on the shelf where I used to keep Carol's winter sweaters. Over the following 2 weeks, Devon found them an apartment, a 2-bedroom in Westerville, about 20 minutes away. First and last month's rent plus deposit came to just over $4,000. Money they apparently had always had been sitting on for over a year while living in my house for free. The day they moved out, I helped carry boxes. I kissed Rosie on the forehead and told her I'd see her Sunday. I shook Devon's hand on the front walk, which felt strange and right at the same time. Amber loaded the last bag into their car without looking at me. When the taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood on the porch for a moment in the cold air. Then I went inside and walked straight through the kitchen and the garage to the workshop. I stood in the empty room for a long time. The shelves were bare. The workbench was clear. The old clock radio was still on the shelf in the corner. They'd left that, at least. I plugged it in and spun the dial until I found an oldies station, and a Carole King song came on that Carol used to hum in the kitchen. I sat down on the workbench stool and I let myself cry, properly for the first time in a long time. Not about Devon and Amber, not about the quilt or the bread box, or 14 months of being slowly squeezed out of my own life. About Carol. Just about Carol. About the fact that she would never sit in this room again with her reading glasses sliding down her nose, and no one living in the house or living across the country was going to change that. And I had spent 3 years keeping that door locked. Like locking it could lock out the fact of her being gone. After a while I turned the radio down and I went and got the bag of fabric squares from my closet. I laid them out on the workbench in the order I imagined Carol might have arranged them. Red and cream squares in the pattern she'd been working toward. I don't quilt. I have never quilted in my life. I am a man who builds things out of wood and fixes small engines and makes chili from a recipe. I haven't written down because I'd made it so many times I don't need to. But I thought maybe I could learn. I went online that evening and I found a quilting class at the community center 3 times over. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, beginners welcome. I signed up for the spring session. I found a book at the library on hand quilting technique and checked it out and read 30 pages of it that night in the chair by the window. I called Devon on Sunday before I went to pick up Rosie. He answered on the second ring. I want you to know, I said, but I'm not angry anymore. I want to be in Rosie's life. I want to be in your life. But I need you to understand what happened, and I need some time before things feel normal between us. He was quiet for a moment. I know, Dad, he said. I should have stopped her. I knew something was wrong, and I told myself it wasn't my problem to deal with. That was wrong. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. I didn't have a ready answer for it, so I just said, "All right. I'll see you when I pick up Rosie." "All right," he said. I drove over and collected my granddaughter, and she fell asleep on the way home with her head tipped to one side in her car seat, and I watched her in the rearview mirror at a red light. This small, perfect person, who had nothing to do with any of the mess adults make of things. And I thought about Carol, who never got to meet her. That afternoon Rosie and I sat on the kitchen floor and she stacked wooden blocks and knocked them down and laughed each time like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. I laughed too, and it was not the performed laugh I'd been offering for 14 months. It was the real one. Some things, once they're lost, you cannot get back. The quilt is gone. The hours of careful stitching Carol put into it are gone. That particular red and cream calico won't become what she meant it to become, and no amount of being right or being wronged will change that. But the workshop has a door, and the door has a lock, and I have the key. And for the first time in 3 years I've left it open. I keep thinking about that bread box sitting on the curb. Not the workshop being emptied, not the quilt being gone, not 14 months of being slowly pushed to the edges of my own home. Just that maple bread box with a bent hinge sitting next to a black trash bag like it was nothing. Like it had always been nothing. That image is the one that cuts cleanest, even now, because it tells the whole story without needing any words. Someone had picked up something I made with my own hands for the woman I loved, carried it out to the curb, and never once wondered if it might matter to someone. That's not carelessness. That's a kind of blindness that comes from never having been asked to consider anyone else's inner life. I spent a long time being angry at Amber. I'd be lying if I said I'm completely past it. But the longer I sit with what happened, the more I understand that Amber was the loudest symptom of a problem that started much quieter, much earlier. In me, in my own willingness to say yes when I should have said, "Let's talk about this first." In my habit of keeping the peace by shrinking myself. I opened my door wide and never once drew a line. And then I was surprised when people walked past every line I hadn't drawn. Devon knew something was wrong when Amber mentioned the workshop. He told me as much. He said he meant to bring it up and then forgot. But that kind of forgetting is a choice made in small increments. The choice to look away from a difficult conversation, to tell yourself it probably won't come to anything, to let someone else absorb the consequences of your avoidance. I raised him better than that. Or I thought I had. Maybe I modeled avoidance more than I realized. What I know now, sitting in Carol's workshop with the radio on and a quilting book I probably won't fully understand for another 6 months, is that doing right by the people you love sometimes means making them uncomfortable. It means saying, that belongs to someone, even when saying so causes friction. Devon could have stopped this. He had the information and the standing, and he chose the easier path. That choice cost him something too, even if it took a while for him to feel it. There's a kind of strength that looks like patience from the outside but is actually just postponement. I was full of it for 14 months. The strength I'm trying to build now is different. It's the kind that knows the difference between generosity and surrender, between keeping your door open and losing the key. Carol was the wisest person I've known. She would not have let any of this happen. not because she was unkind, but because she understood that clarity is its own form of love. Telling someone the truth about what you need, what matters, what the limits are. That's not selfishness. That's how you keep things from rotting quietly in the walls. I signed up for that quilting class. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. My hands are built for wood and engines, not fine needlework. But I'll learn what I can, and I'll use Carol's fabric, and whatever I make will be imperfect and honest and mine. That feels like enough to start with.